psychology.
Could you tell us what your responsibilities and duties as a psychologist include?
Sure. I do about, there's four major areas of responsibilities I see as a psychologist, at least of what my training background is. One is, in psychological terms, it's psychotherapy, but that means counseling. And that takes two major premises: individual counseling on a one-to-one basis with a student, or group counseling, or group psychotherapy. Generally the term is used in high school situations like this is counseling. It's more of a less problematic type of working with kids. Then there's also psychological testing, the next major area after psychotherapy, and that includes diagnostic testing to look at educational, emotional, family, social problems that a child might be having or a young person might be having, and then determining ways to help that person, doing it through the testing. And the testing includes psychological testing through interviews, different types of tests that we call projective, objective, or subjective tests, and that's kind of a complicated thing to go into. Then the third major area would be in-service staff training, and that would be training dormitory staff, counselors, teachers, on how to deal with children, how to more effectively deal with kids or young people, or themselves, to help each other in what I guess I'd term a therapeutic model. Then you got the last one would be research, would be the last area, and that's type of like an ongoing research with it.
The majority of your efforts directed in any one of these several areas?
I'd say there's a lot of time I spent with in-service training. Very little right now with research, although that was part of in-service training. And testing would probably be the next least, and then counseling quite a little. But a lot of in-service training that's either formal, that goes on in like almost like a classroom setting with people, or informal in helping people do counseling themselves, dorm problems, things like that. And so I have a fifth function, I think, right now. It's as an acting supervisor, and that's a lot of administration work, and I would guess probably a third of my time is being spent right now in strictly administrative stuff with children and with faculty and so forth.
Do you do a lot of counseling with students then?
Yeah, I do quite. I can't, like I say, maybe a couple hours a day probably. Maybe sometimes much more than that, and sometimes less. Right now, if I'm just working as a psychologist, usually 3 to 4 hours a day is counseling, either an individual, and most of it here is an individual. Most places I've worked, so it's in group type of setting, group counseling, things like that.
What types of problems do students come to you with, and how do you handle those problems?
Well, it's just about any type of problem you can imagine. You've got loneliness the first part of the year, and homesick would be a major problem that I see happening right now. Sometimes there's problems with interpersonal relationships with teachers and students, and this is kind of comes out as a discipline problem a lot of times. Problems finding their own identity, which kind of manifests itself in it could be not knowing what to do, or getting involved in classes, things like that. Another area, of course, would be your areas of drugs, but that's just a symptom of something else. Alcohol, sometimes paint. I think paint and alcohol are the two I consider the worst. Of course, there's marijuana also, but I'm not saying that's it's not on the same level of problem as I see it. It's a different type of person that you see usually that is abusing marijuana. If they're abusing marijuana, it's usually that they're also taking alcohol or some other type of drug, usually painkiller.
How do you feel about the environment, having an effect on students?
Oh, that's okay. There's two major effects that I see occurring on students. The environment would be external things, and the internal effect which he brings to that environment. The environment here, I think, is all important. If we have an environment that's suppressing or depressing, and by suppressing I mean putting down or over-controlling a student, then he will react by withdrawing or acting out in an aggressive way. If it's depressing, he may turn things in. If it's depressing, like if the dorm room doesn't seem like a home, or if the atmosphere doesn't seem homey or friendly, then he would have a tendency to become depressed or down on himself also. In psychological jargon, it would turn it inward. And then he would hurt himself by the symptoms didn't come out usually in drinking, which is a self-destructive type of thing, to get rid of the pain of my depression. So if you don't have a kind of a healthy environment for kids, where they feel like there's friends around them, they feel like they've got kind of surrogate parents around here, where they feel like they've got someone to talk to, they're either going to direct something outward towards society around them, or they're going to put themselves down. Most of the kids I see here do more self-destructive stuff. Yeah.
Do you think that the physical environment, like the buildings and stuff, do you unconsciously play a big part in affecting students a lot?
I don't think it's a major thing. I think it's a very significant thing, but I don't think it's. I think if you said to someone that the buildings were the problem, I would think it's a superficial thing. It's what's in the buildings that counts. I think that buildings can have an effect on staff and make them depressed. I think one of the major problems with the buildings here is not maybe they're not in good shape, but is the way they're situated so far apart from each other that there's very little communication between teachers. Many teachers have one classroom that's separate, another one, so forth. So they don't communicate with other teachers. Counseling is separated. Dorms are completely separated, and I don't see the communication system between them. I think that might have more an effect than the physical facilities. Although the physical facilities, I don't think are utopia. And I think if you look at them with pictures and so forth, I don't need to talk about that. You can see that.
Do you get involved much in the students' academics life?
Not in the teaching aspect. I get involved with it in such a way that I work with teachers. If a teacher has problems with the child, then we in the counseling center here, and I as a psychologist usually hear about it. And that means that I'll often go into the classroom and work with a teacher to help them with a behavioral or emotional thing that's going on. If I do a psychological workup and I see a lot of educational stuff, I'll work with an academic. I think personally I'd like to work more with that because I see it kind of a holistic thing. That academics are part of the total living that a young person comes to school here. If he's dysfunctioning in academics, and I as a person can help that, then I'm really helping his whole environment.
How do you feel students are affected by being separated from their parents and their brothers and sisters and during their adolescence? Is that a business?
It all depends. It can be a strength. We have a lot of kids here that are from broken homes. Well, this becomes a family for some of them, and being separated from the school here actually hurts them. If the family is quite close and they don't get to communicate with the student, then it hurts. I think a lot of times siblings are split, and that's painful, and I think it can hurt a child, and it can hurt him in a negative way if he doesn't find another model. Say he has an older sister, take it, kind of help him out, but she's not here. If that person doesn't find another model or another positive model, then he's liable to find a negative model and get involved in things that are irresponsible for him or others, and that can hurt a great deal. I think I'd have been lonely, and it would have hurt me, I think, to come to a residential school like this. But at the same time, as part of my high school, I lived away from home, and I don't think it hurt me. I think it strengthened me, as long as I could go home periodically. And I went home just about every weekend. But some of the kids that we have, there's no family dynamics at home saying, hey, come home when you can. And so it's just a total lack of family. I think when kids can go home every week or two, they still form a solid type of family living, and I think that's extremely important to keep that stability going.
And you were talking with an instructional aide that the attorney said at one time to see a child with the background class and the family and stuff, they kept in the dorm, and that made their work a lot easier. That we were told that the child was taken from the dorm and kept by different administrative part. It made it harder on the students. I was wondering, do you know why that was done?
I don't know. I wasn't involved with that, but I would guess it was done because of the Privacy Type Act. That I think files have to be kept under a place where they're secure, literally. You know. And I think that there probably is some difficulties over here because of that. I don't know of any other reason. I wasn't involved with it. I think a lot of times knowing the family background and so forth gives a person kind of a jump on a situation and can help. And I kind of can empathize or resonate with the people over here when I hear that, because there's a certain, I think, validity in background, although I guess I work from a present base with people, and I see that I'm interested in what they're doing now. I think it can be a negative thing to have too much records on a kid, too. So that a person can come here with a broken home, with a bad record in school, and everybody finds out about it, and there's no way in the world that person's going to make a success of himself, because everybody already kind of labeled him. And so there's a disadvantage of having a lot of records, too. When I'm working directly as a psychologist, yeah. But when I'm working as administrator a third of the time, no. I guess I'm just been thinking about that the last 2 days. I spent 9 years in school kind of working up towards this, and all of a sudden some of the skills are not being used. I think the areas of testing, I don't get time to do it because it's a time consuming. But as I talk to psychologists and other positions, very few people after they're out a while get time to do testing. And so that level of skill, the skills of interpersonal relationships with even an administrative role, I think my psychology skills help me a great deal in dealing with staff as an administrator and helping.
Do you have any sort of overall objective about consciousness, making it happier?
Well, yeah. Well, let me tell you, they're the ones that are going to be responsible for their own happiness, but their behavior kind of equals how they're going to feel about what they're doing. If they're into something destructive, they may feel good for a few minutes or a few hours, but they're not going to feel good over the long term, sort of. So I try to get people into a responsible type of living, where they help themselves and help the people that they live around, be it the culture that they come from. And in that way, I guess when I'm working with kids here, I'm thinking about ways to work with them that I call that do not go countercultural, that fit with their culture, so that can kind of centralment in with their culture. And generally, I think that's why I ask students to evaluate their own behavior and see what's good for them and what's good for their family or the culture that they come from. And they know, they really do know. And so that's my major goal with everybody I work with. And that's saying a lot in a few words, you know. We could talk about all the different types of models of treatment that I use, and we could talk really for hours on that. That's a big question, but that's it shortened down. So I try to get them to do something responsible to help themselves and help others. I try also to make friends with them, not maybe as a peer equal, but as another person in their lives that they can get involved with. That's a major goal on my part, and I think with some of the students that are having difficulties, they're kind of afraid to make friends, because some of the friends they've made before have hurt them. And so that's a very challenging aspect, to make friends, and I think once you make friends, then they will evaluate their own behavior in an honest way with you. So if they're doing something that's destructive, they'll be honest. If you don't have that friendship, sometimes they won't admit that that they're hurting themselves. That type of thing. Okay.
They keep going to say it's stop, and I said stop. Wave on it. He's the only getting monsters in the way of the place this morning. What's this one? Wave kind of tight. You know what we did at the class? I said, you know, go before that big church community. Yeah, I see, you know. Is your first year here? Come here before? Yeah. Where are you from? You? You too? Yeah. From what? I'm in California. Oh, how about you? You're what? I'm good. Oh. For the army? For the what? No, this is for, we're doing a documentary in a school for the All Indian Pueblo Council. So they'll have the copies of it. And they show what it's like on a little TV monitor. Maybe I'm getting fat. No, I'm just trying to get all of the It's running out of battery power because that's what happened. It's in the red. Is it? Yeah, I'm focusing to not be there. I think it's running out of power. You know what? We don't have any focus time. I just run it out then. It is, it's all unfocused.
Either an individual, and most of it here is an individual. Most places I've worked, so it's in group type of setting, group counseling, things like that.
What types of problems do students come to you with? How do you handle these problems?
Well, it's just about any type of problem you can imagine. You've got loneliness the first part of the year, and homesick would be a major problem that I see happening right now. Sometimes there's problems with interpersonal relationships with teachers and students, and this is kind of comes out as a discipline problem a lot of times. Problems finding their own identity, which kind of manifests itself in it could be not knowing what to do or getting involved in classes, things like that. Another area, of course, would be your areas of drugs, but that's just a symptom of something else. Alcohol, sometimes paint. I think paint and alcohol. There's a lot of time I spent with in-service training. Very little right now with research, although that was part of in-service training. And testing would probably be the next least, and then counseling quite a little. But a lot of in-service training that's either formal, that goes on in like almost like a classroom setting with people, or informal in helping people do counseling themselves, dorm problems, things like that. And so I have a fifth function, I think, right now. It's as an acting supervisor, and that's a lot of administration work, and I would guess probably a third of my time is being spent right now in strictly administrative stuff with children and with faculty and so forth.
Do you do a lot of counseling with students then?
Yeah, I do quite. I can't, like I say, maybe a couple hours a day probably. Maybe sometimes much more than that, and sometimes less. Right now, if I'm just working as a psychologist, usually 3 to 4 hours a day is counseling to look at educational, emotional, family, social problems that a child might be having or a young person might be having, and then determining ways to help that person, doing it through the testing. And the testing includes psychological testing through interviews, different types of tests that we call projective, objective, or subjective tests, and that's kind of a complicated thing to go into. Then the third major area would be in-service staff training, and that would be training dormitory staff, counselors, teachers, on how to deal with children, how to more effectively deal with kids or young people or themselves to help each other in what I guess I'd term a therapeutic model. Then you got the last one would be research, would be the last area, and that's type of like an ongoing research with it.
The majority of your efforts directed in any one of these several areas?
I'd say the two I consider the worst, of course, is marijuana also, but I'm not saying that's it's not on the same level of problem as I see it. It's a different type of person that you see usually that is abusing marijuana. If they're abusing marijuana, it's usually that they're also taking alcohol or some other type of drug, usually painkiller.
How do you feel about the environment, having an effect on students?
Oh, that's okay. There's two major effects that I see occurring on students. The environment would be external things, and the internal effect that he brings to that environment. The environment here, I think, is all important. If we have an environment that's suppressing or depressing, and by suppressing I mean putting down or over-controlling a student, then he will react by withdrawing or acting out in a psychotic.
Could you tell us what your responsibilities and duties as a psychologist include?
Sure. I do there's 4 major areas of responsibilities I see as a psychologist, at least of what my training background is. One is, in psychological terms, it's psychotherapy, but that means counseling. And that takes 2 major premises: individual counseling on a one-to-one basis with a student, or group counseling, or group psychotherapy. Generally, the term is used in high school situations like this is counseling. It's more of a less problematic type of working with kids. Then there's also psychological testing, the next major area after psychotherapy, and that includes diagnostic testing for